Welcome to the Bald Eagle Podcast. I am Sean Cressman. I am the Bald Eagle. Thanks for joining me. This is the playoff edition of the Bald Eagle Podcast. Normally, my podcast is 100% Eagles all the time. Eagles news, Eagles games. I offer the most in-depth play-by-play analysis of our games, but this time we're doing a playoff edition. Won't be getting quite as detailed in this edition because we're talking about 6 games. But everything else remains the same about my podcast. So even though we're going to talk about more than just the Eagles, the 3 rules still apply. I always like to go over those so people are aware of what they're getting themselves into. First rule is no politics. I don't talk about that at all, no matter how bad or how strongly anybody feels about either side. I completely ignore that stuff. The only exception would be, and this is an exception to almost every one of my rules, the exception to one of our rules would be if it impacts the game. And a good example would be the restrictions on fans in stadiums. That you could absolutely say was somewhat political, and it did impact the game. So that would be the exception. All right, so we don't have much of a countdown either. The countdown would be just for the divisional game. And the divisional games are this round, this Saturday. So we got 3 days to the divisional round. Saturday at 4:35, the number 6 Rams take on or go to Green Bay and play the number 1 Packers. That'll be on Fox. On Saturday at 8:15 p.m., number 5 Ravens are at the number 2 Bills. That is on NBC. And then Sunday we got a 3:05 game, number 6 Browns at the number 1 Chiefs. And then a 6:40 game, the number 5 Buccaneers, the number 2 Saints. So I don't know about you guys, but just to kind of give you a heads up of what kind of a fan I am, I actually watched all 6 games on Sunday. So I record things. I have the DVR and I have the NFL Game Pass. I ripped through the first 3 games. I think I got done them by like 3:00, and then I continued to watch the other 3 games. So, and the funny thing is at the end of the 6 games, and this happens every week when I watch football, but I was like, there's no more games. There's nothing else to watch. I would have absolutely been up for another game. So, all right. So let's start with some game highlights. So, the number 7 Colts played the second place Bills. Final score was 27-24 in favor of the Bills. Pretty close game, surprisingly close in my opinion. I didn't expect the Colts to do as well. I wasn't expecting the Colts to do as well as they did. Josh Allen, I haven't watched him a lot throughout the season. He's done a great job and is well known for for moving around the pocket when he's pressured. He's able to look downfield while he's doing that and throw accurately. He did very well. In fact, I believe against the Colts, he had a career high 117 yards out of the pocket. So good game by him. The Colts honestly had a chance. In fact, they had 2 chances to tie up or win the game. 3 technically. Early on in the game, there was a ball that was slightly overthrown in the end zone and ended up being an incompletion. Could have been a touchdown. Easily could have been a touchdown. I forget the receivers that it was thrown to, but he laid out for it and just couldn't quite get it. So another inch closer, and that would have been a touchdown and could have impacted the game. And then late in the third quarter, the Colts missed a field goal. It wasn't a very long one either, but they still missed it. So even with those two missteps, they still had a chance in the fourth quarter to drive down the field and win. They just couldn't do it. There was one instance where it was almost caught a fumble, and then he did convert because it was a completion. But I think it was 4th and 10, and there was an incomplete pass thrown. So Colts weren't able to do it, even though they played well. Close game. In fact, the Colts had more yards. They had roughly 9 minutes more of time of possession, but they were only 2 for 5 in the red zone, so not real efficient when they did get down there. Phillip Rivers ended 27 for 46. That was about 58.7% of his passes complete, slightly below average. 309 yards. He threw for 2 touchdowns. Didn't have any interceptions. Didn't get sacked once. So the quarterback rating he had was roughly 93.5. The running back Taylor had 21 rushes for 78 yards. Slightly 3.7 average is a little bit below average. And then he had 1 touchdown. And then their top receiver was Pittman. He had 5 receptions for 90 yards and averaged about 18 per carry. The Bills much improved in the red zone. They were 2 for 2. Allen was was the leading passer and rusher in this game. That's going to be a unique storyline going into the divisional round. But he was the leading passer and rusher. Passing, he was 26 for 35, which is a 74.3% completion percentage. I believe that was the best in Wild Card Weekend. Threw for 324 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was sacked twice and lost 23 yards in those 2 sacks. But his quarterback rating was 121.6. Off the top of my head, I believe that was also the best rating for the Wild Card Weekend. Their running back Allen, I mentioned Allen was both the passing and rushing leader. He had 11 rushes for 54 yards, which is a 4.9 average, and a touchdown. Top receiver, of course, was Stephon Diggs, top receiver in the NFL during the regular season as well. He had 6 receptions on 9 targets for 128 yards. That's a 21.3 average and 1 touchdown. So Bills looked very good, but still was a close game. So let me bring up the number 5 Ravens went to the number 4 seed Tennessee Titans. Of course, they won 20-13 in an odd game. I say odd only because Tennessee has Derrick Henry, who was only the 8th player in NFL history to run for 2,000 yards in one season. And he ended the game with 18 rushes for 40 yards. So kind of odd that Tennessee, who was one of the better running teams, had the best running back in the league, barely ran. And in fact, Baltimore was able to hold Derrick Henry to an average of 2.2 yards per carry. But Derrick Henry was 7th in the NFL with 5.2 yards per carry during the regular season. So whether you say that it was Tennessee not running the ball often enough, or perhaps you think Baltimore's defense was able to hold up Derrick Henry, either way, Tennessee seemed to focus on trying to throw the ball instead of running with, which I find odd. Tannehill, and of course they lost. It was not a successful strategy. Tannehill finished the game 18 for 26. That's 69.2%. Only threw for 165 yards. Had 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Was sacked once and lost 7 yards with that sack. His quarterback rating was an even 83. So, a mediocre performance by him, which is frustrating, I would think, for Tennessee, because they really were leaning on him to win. I mentioned Derrick Henry. He only had 18 rushes for 40 yards. That's a 2.2 average, significantly lower than his season average of 5.2. And then A.J. Brown was their top receiver with 6 receptions, 83 yards, and a 13.8 average and a touchdown. Baltimore played well in a defensive game. Defensive games typically tilt towards running teams, and this was essentially no exception. Baltimore had almost twice as many total yards, and they had 200, and that was primarily because they had 236 rushing yards, and Tennessee only had 51. Again, we expect Baltimore to run a lot. They're primarily a running team, but I would also expect Tennessee to run as well, and again, they didn't. Baltimore dominated almost every statistic in that game. They had more first downs, more plays, more total yards, more passing yards, more rushing yards, and they had the ball more often in time of possession. Jackson was 17 for 24, which is a 70.8% completion rate. He had 179 yards, did not have a throwing touchdown, and did have 1 interception. He was sacked 5 times, lost 14 yards with those sacks. His quarterback rating ended at 74.8. Nothing amazing, but he essentially won the game and kept them in the game with his legs. He was, of course, also the leading rusher for the Ravens. He had 16 rushes for 136 yards, which is an 8.5 yard average, and he did have 1 running touchdown. He also had, surprisingly, so he had 179 passing yards. 109 of those went to Marquise Brown, who had 7 receptions for 109 yards and a 15.6 average. So those 2 games, Buffalo winning and Baltimore winning, means that number 5 Baltimore will be at number 2 Buffalo. Again, that's Saturday at 8:15 on NBC. So in my opinion, and I'm sure you could look this up and a lot of articles would confirm it, is essentially this is going to come down to both quarterbacks. They were both drafted in 2008. They have somewhat similar styles. I think Jackson runs significantly more than Allen, but both of them represented a big percentage of their offenses, and a lot of it was, and both of them led their teams in both rushing and passing. So, for example, Lamar Jackson was responsible for over 78% of Baltimore's total offensive yards, while Josh Allen was 95% of Buffalo's offense. So, and I think the key essentially to this game, unsurprisingly, is stopping Lamar Jackson. If they're able to contain Jackson on the ground, I do not think that Lamar Jackson can win, a passing competition with Allen. I think Allen would do significantly better, not just because Allen has shown that he's a better pocket passer and a better passer on the run, but he also has much better weapons at his disposal. So Buffalo needs to somehow, and that's the key, somehow contain Jackson and not let him run all over him like he did against the Titans. Now that's going to put some pressure on Buffalo's edge defenders: Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, Matt Milano, AJ Klein, and their middle linebacker Tremaine Edmonds. They're going to have to really stiffen up and make sure they keep him in under wraps. In my opinion, I think the Bills are most likely going to win this. I think that Josh Allen's passing game will overcome even a good running game. I think in most situations, if you have a strong passing game and it's going against a strong rushing game, I think the passing game would most likely win. The Bills' offense has been on a roll. They've averaged over the last seven of the last 9 games. They've had over 30 points, and during that span, they've averaged 36.7 points. Even though I think that the Bills will win, one thing to consider too is the weather. So the game's going to be played in Buffalo. According to weather.com, the high on Saturday is supposed to be 37 degrees. Now that's the high. This is an 8:15. This is a night game, so we won't be experiencing the high temperature. So, it could dip down into the mid to low 30s, and there's a 40% chance of it was rain, snow, and mix. So that may tilt the game towards the Ravens. The sloppier it gets, the rainy and snowier it is, I think that kind of benefits of course, it usually benefits the ground game and the Ravens game, especially if we're talking about slick conditions like ice and things like that. It makes it hard to throw the ball, and the precipitation can sometimes affect the play. So that could impact the game, and perhaps that's why the majority of articles that I've read kind of say this is a toss-up, and the spread kind of reflects that. Currently, the spread is Buffalo giving away 2.5 points, and the over/under is 50. So there's not a big spread on this game either. So even the odds makers think it should be close. Okay, let's move on to the number 6 Rams. They were at the number 3 Seahawks this weekend. The Rams won 30-20 in a in a defensive game, I would say. And I say that because, thinking about both teams' quarterbacks going into the game, we were going to see for the Rams, Wolford was going to start. And then, of course, Russell Wilson is going to start for the Seahawks. And you would think initially they would have the upper hand, but this game was defensive, and it was both quarterback positions, basically fighting each other to see who could be the worst. And I say that because neither quarterback had any significant numbers. Russell Wilson, unfortunately, won the game of being the worst quarterback. He was inaccurate. He was under pressure often. And then the Rams dominated the rushing game with a great game by Akers, who was 6 yards away from outrushing the entire Seahawks team. So numbers for that one, Russell Wilson ended 11 for 27, which is a 40.2% completion rate, which is awful. He only had 174 yards, did have 2 touchdowns. He also had 1 interception. He was sacked 5 times, which took away 32 yards. And his quarterback rating was 72.1, one of the lower ones of the league, which is, in my opinion, unexpected for Russell Wilson. Their leading running back was Carson. He had 16 rushes for 77 yards, 4.8 average, not bad. DK Metcalf was their leading receiver, but he struggled early. Early on, he was getting frustrated because I don't think he was targeted as often as he would like. He did end the game with some decent numbers. He was targeted 11 times, only caught 5 of those. He did have 96 yards, a 19.2 average, and he did have Seattle's 2 receiving touchdowns. So he did have a decent game. When you go over to the Rams, who again did win the game, Wolford started, but if you didn't see it, Jamal Adams put a pretty hard hit with his shoulder into Wolford's head. They didn't call it a penalty on the field. I don't know if it was reviewed off the top of my head, but the analysts went to their their official. I forget who it is for the station they were on, but everybody has that old official or former official that's now the officiating person for the station. They went to him, and he actually thought it should have been a penalty because they felt like Wolford was defenseless and given himself up for the play. So the hit to his head, even though it wasn't head-to-head contact, should have been called. I don't know. I think that was such a quick play. I don't know how I feel about that. Perhaps it was a penalty. Perhaps it wasn't. But it was meaningful because Wolford, I think, had a concussion afterwards, and Goff came in. Goff did not start because of thumb surgery that he hadn't completely healed from, but he had to come in, and he did struggle. They mentioned numerous times that his accuracy was off. Some of the balls came out a little awkwardly. I think they said something like 1 out of every 5 passes when he was in practice had a little bit of something off on it, most likely because his thumb hasn't healed completely. The main thing really that separated not only poor statistics, but the main thing that separated the quarterback rooms from both teams was turnovers, because neither of them completed a significant amount of their passes. Neither of them had significant yardage, but only one of them had a turnover. So Goff ended the game. He had more snaps than Wolford. I think Wolford may have had 6 or 7 snaps total. Goff ended the game 9 for 19, which is a 47.4% completion percentage. Very poor. Only had 155 yards. Did have 1 touchdown. Was sacked twice, and that sacks lost 15 yards. And his quarterback rating was 93.1. So horrible completion percentage, most likely due to inaccurate, the inaccurate passes from the thumb. The real hero for the Rams anyway, and the real person to kind of move this game forward was Akers. He had a great game. He had 28 rushes for 131 yards, which is a 4.7 average, and 1 touchdown. So almost the kind of game that you expected Derrick Henry to have, actually. But Akers had it, and he essentially carried the team, because without that rushing yardage, being able to drive down the field and take time away off the clock, most likely the Seahawks are able to come back and win. The Rams' leading receiver was Cooper Kupp. He had 4 reception on 9 targets, 78 yards, and that is a 19.5 yard average. So after that game, we're gonna preview the Rams number 6 at the number 1 Packers. That's on 4:35 Saturday, and it's on Fox. This is only the 3rd time these two teams have met in the postseason. The Packers are going into the offseason with a 6-game win streak. They also had the league's highest scoring offense, all while committing the least amount of turnovers. So just an offensive juggernaut that is going to be difficult for anybody to stop. They also have, I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but Aaron Rodgers, who led the league in completion percentage, quarterback rating, and touchdowns during the regular season, and is most likely a leading candidate for league MVP. So stacked offense. One of the things that I'm excited to watch, because the Rams have a good defense, specifically Jalen Ramsey is one of the best corners in the league. It's going to be exciting to see him go up directly against Davante Adams. That's going to be a nice matchup. In my opinion, I think this is most likely, I don't know. The spread's a little higher on this one. It's they're giving the Packers 6.5. Over under is a little lower at 45.5 points. I'm thinking this is probably going to be, I think the Packers are going to win this game, and I think they're going to win pretty convincingly. Even if Goff has that extra week of healing, I still don't know that he's going to be 100%. I haven't read anything that says he's 100%, because he wasn't expected to play last week, and I don't think they expected him to play this week either. The only way that there seems to be somewhat of a path for a win for the Rams, but the only way that that's going to happen is if they can cause turnovers. In the Packers, I think 3 losses this season, they were outrushed and they committed turnovers, and those are the only 2 real differences between their wins and their losses. So, if they have any chance at winning, they need to cause turnovers, which is going to be a struggle because remember, they turn it over the least amount of times in the regular season, but they got to figure out a way, and they got to figure out a way to stop the rushing game, which I don't think would be significant. But those are the things that they need to do to at least make the game close. Otherwise, I don't know that it's going to be a real close game. Now, weather will also be somewhat of an issue because again, they're playing in Green Bay. 4:30, so it will be dark halfway through the game. Saturday in Green Bay, the high is 34 degrees, and there's a 25% chance of rain. Again, generally speaking, the high is at 1 p.m. during the day. I lost my thought there, train of thought there for a second. The high is generally around noon to 1 p.m. So a 4:30 game, again, the high is 34. It's not going to be 34 when the game starts. There's a 25% chance of rain too. If it goes lower, that could turn into snow, and we could have rough conditions. But no matter the precipitation or anything, the Packers are significantly more comfortable and used to playing in outdoor weather like that. So I think they have an advantage for the weather. So not only do they have probably tied for second, one of the best offenses in the league with the Chiefs, but they also are more comfortable in those weather, and of course they're at home. Not that there's, I didn't look up the attendance. I don't know what Green Bay's restrictions have been. I don't know. So, but either way, home field advantage. This season hasn't been much of an advantage, but perhaps there'll be some fans in the stadium. Okay, so that brings up number 5, Tampa Bay played number 4, Washington. Tampa Bay won 31-23. Again, a surprisingly close game. I think we were all kind of impressed. Even Brian Westbrook made a point to bring him up about Taylor Heineke. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Heineke. Yeah, Heineken. He actually looked very good against Tampa Bay's defense. However, he wasn't good enough to beat Tampa Bay. Now, this was actually Tom Brady's first appearance in a wild card game. Tom Brady has always made it to the divisional round, or as one of the top teams in the league. He did have a decent game. He was 22 for 40. That's 55% completion rate, which is a little bit below average. He had 381 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was sacked 3 times, lost 16 yards, but his quarterback rating was 104.3. So solid game from Brady. Fournette was their lead rusher. He had 19 carries for 93 yards, which is a 4.9 average, and he had 1 touchdown. And then Mike Evans, top receiver, 6 receptions on 10 targets, 119 yards, and a 19.8 average. Ryan Reese is watching the show right now, and he said that the Buffalo is going to roll over Baltimore. I think they I don't know. I think they should. I agree. I think they'll win, but I don't know if they're going to roll over them. But I guess we'll see. Going back to Tampa Bay and Washington, Taylor Heineke was 26 for 44. It's a 59.1% completion rate. He had 306 yards, 1 touchdown. Didn't have 1 interception, but his quarterback rating was 78.4. He was also Washington's leading rusher. So that's 3 of the 6 games. The quarterbacks, 3 quarterbacks in 3 of the 6 games, the quarterback on one team led the team in both passing and rushing. Heineke had 6 rushes for 46 yards, and that's a 7.7 average and a touchdown. So their leading receiver was Cam Sims. He had 7 receptions on 13 targets for 104 yards and an average of 14.9. Okay, so then the next game we're going to go over is the number 7 Chicago Bears at number 2 New Orleans. New Orleans had a relatively easy game. They won 21-9. New Orleans offense was way too much for Chicago's defense. Close game at the half, 7-3, but the Saints really pulled away and won convincingly. Chicago spent most of the game trailing. They leaned on Trubinsky to try and win. I don't believe, and Trubinsky kind of proved that he isn't that type of a quarterback, and they were unsuccessful. New Orleans defense also played really well. They held Chicago to only 11 first downs, Now, out of those 11, 4 of those first downs came in the fourth quarter during garbage time, when the game was essentially over. Chicago was 1 out of 10 on third down, and throughout the whole game only had 48 rushing yards. So New Orleans was able to do a great job on Chicago's offense. Trubinsky ended the game 19 for 29. That's a 65.5% completion percentage, pretty good. 199 yards, 1 touchdown, no interception. He was sacked once and lost 8 yards on that sack, but that is a pretty good 96.8 quarterback rating. So not a horrible game by him, just not a game-winning performance. Their leading running back was Montgomery. He only had 12 carries for 31 yards. It's an average of 2.6 per carry, very poor. And Robinson, their leading receiver, only had 6 receptions on 7 targets for 55 yards. So all around, their offense was stagnant. Drew Brees ended 28 for 39, 71.8% completion percentage, which I believe was slightly worse than Allen. Allen was 74.3%. So he wasn't able to, Brees wasn't able to outdo his completion percentage, but it was still very good. 265 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a 107.3 quarterback rating. Let's see if that was better than Allen. Nope, Allen was 121.6. So it looks like Allen was the best quarterback in Super Wildcard Weekend. Okay, so that's Drew Brees' stats. Now we go to Kamara. He had 23 rushes for 99 yards, 4.3 average, 1 touchdown. And Deontay Harris had 7 receptions on 7 targets for 83 yards. Notice when I'm talking about the receivers, this is a reflection of Brees' accuracy, which I believe he has recorded the record completion percentage in the season, maybe twice actually. But all the other receivers I mentioned, they had 6 receptions on 10 targets. I think Metcalf was 5 receptions on 11. Deontay Harris, 7 receptions on 7 targets, didn't miss a ball. And that's a reflection of not only the quality of receivers in New Orleans, but Drew Brees on his own. So those 2 games resulted in a Tampa Bay win. So number 5 Tampa Bay goes to number 2 New Orleans. That is a Sunday game at 6:40 p.m. Weather is not an issue because, of course, they play in a dome. This will actually be the 3rd time Brees and Brady have played each other. And this will be the 3rd time this season. Both times during the regular season, New Orleans won. And in fact, the most recent game in Week 9 was a convincing loss. So they won 34-23 at home in Week 1, which that was Tom Brady's first game in a new system and a new coach and all that stuff. So admittedly, not in his strengths. However, when they played in Tampa Bay, Week 9, the Saints won 38-3, and it was a significant win. Now, there have only been 7 teams that have played a 3rd time in the playoffs. So the teams that are trying to avoid an 0-3 sweep, I apologize. There have only been 7 times when teams have played a 3rd time, and one of the teams have gotten swept in regular season. I apologize for the error. So teams that are 0-2 and play the same team again in the playoffs are 2-5. So if I'm not saying that correctly, Tampa Bay has lost to the Saints twice this season. The odds of them winning historically are 2-5. Historically speaking, similar teams have been 2-5 in the 3rd matchup. So there actually isn't any momentum for the losing team. There's in fact momentum for the winning team. In both losses to the Saints, Tom Brady had multiple interceptions. And in Week 9, he threw 3 interceptions and no touchdowns. And his quarterback rating was 40.4, which I think Carson Wentz actually has been beat. Carson Wentz's quarterback rating was better than that. Carson Wentz, he had numerous 3 interception games as well. But so it seems like the recipe for success against Tom Brady is to cause turnovers. And the way to do that is to do the same thing that the Saints did against the Bears. Maintain possession of the ball a majority of the time, and go up early so that Tampa Bay is forced to throw more often than they like. And that gives the Saints secondary an opportunity to make some plays. So long clock draining drives. Let's see. I already know. So Tampa Bay will either have to pressure Breeze to cause turnovers, or when trailing, not make any mistakes and execute drives with no interceptions. I think personally that the Saints easily win this game. I think the Saints they have a blueprint for success not only in week 1 but in week 9. So I think they'll just execute that pretty easily, and I think they'll win pretty convincingly in this game. Odds makers aren't quite as convinced as I am. New Orleans has given away 3 points, so not a big spread, and the over/under is 51.5. All right, so the next game, well, probably one of the more exciting games and surprising games of the weekend was the number 6 Cleveland Browns at the number 3 Pittsburgh Steelers. Final score was 48-37 in favor of the Browns. They had a record-setting 28-point first quarter. I think that was the most points scored in any quarter of a playoff game. And all the turnovers that the Steelers committed, specifically the 4 interceptions, were just too much for them to overcome in the highest scoring game in Super Wildcard weekend. So Pittsburgh led in most stats. Of course, they had a ton of offense. They had more first downs, more plays, more total and passing yards, better red zone percentage, and they had 5 more minutes in time of possession. They just had 5 turnovers, and I don't know the statistics. Perhaps I should have looked this up, but I don't know what the odds of winning a game if your team has 5 turnovers. I can't imagine they're above the teens. Roethlisberger, speaking of 5 turnovers, so Roethlisberger ended 47 for 68. That's 69.1%, which is pretty decent when you consider he threw 68, or he dropped back 68 times. He had 501 passing yards. He threw for 4 touchdowns, but he also threw for 4 interceptions. He wasn't sacked once, and he had an 85.5 quarterback rating. So as far as a quarterback rating, his touchdowns, yardage, and completion percentage really overtook the 4 picks. So I would expect it to be a little lower. Leading rusher for Pittsburgh was Connor, only 11 rushes for 37 yards. They were playing from behind the whole game, so they couldn't stop and run very often. He averaged only 3.4 yards per carry. Did have a touchdown, and then Smith-Schuster had 13 receptions on 19 targets for 157 yards, a 12.1 average, and 1 touchdown. I think those 157 yards led the league for Super Wild Card weekend. Cleveland didn't get nearly the amount of yards. They didn't need to. They were much more efficient when they did have the ball. Mayfield was 21 for 34, which is 61.8% average, had 236 yards, but he had 3 touchdowns. That's what I mean by more efficient. He had half as many dropbacks as Roethlisberger and only 1 less touchdown. Wasn't sacked. Neither quarterback, in fact, was sacked during this game. Mayfield's quarterback rating was 115.2. Very respectable, very good. So Mayfield had a really good game. Chubb had 18 rushes for 76 yards. That's a 4.2 average. And Kareem Hunt had 2 rushing touchdowns. I want to throw that in there because they kind of run each other. He was pretty close as far as rushing yardage as well, too, so I don't want to ignore him. And then the Browns' leading receiver was Landry. He had 5 receptions on 8 targets for 92 yards, 18.4 average, and 1 touchdown. So after that win, the Cleveland Browns, unfortunately for them, they go to the playoffs for the first time in, I think, 25 years. They win their first playoff game for the first time in 26 years, 2004. They won a wild card game. And unfortunately, they waited 26 years to play probably, the best team in the NFL. And we can say that because they won the Super Bowl last year and they were the number 1 seed and had the best record, number 1 seed in the AFC, best record in the NFL. So unfortunately for the Browns, their first playoff win does not come with much hope. So Cleveland goes into Kansas City Sunday at 3:05 on CBS. Weather might be an issue again, but Cleveland is of course, more comfortable in cold weather than other teams, and so I don't know that it'll affect either team more or less. Both teams are able to run. I guess Cleveland has somewhat of an edge in the running game, but I don't know if it's that significant. So Kansas City was ranked in the regular season number 1 in passing yards per game, while Cleveland was ranked 25th in passing defense. Even worse, and of course, the last game is really going to inflate the stats, 500-yard passing yards given up. They were 30th in the league over the last 3 games. So you're going against it's not a good doesn't look very good for Cleveland if Kansas City has their normal passing game. Specifically bad in the passing game, the Browns struggled against tight ends. They ranked 28th in the league against tight ends. That's bad news because Kansas City happens to have the receiver that was second in the league in yards happens to be a tight end, Travis Kelce. So not only do they have Mahomes, which does ridiculous things with the ball and is able to throw when off balance, but they also have Travis Kelce, who is the best tight end in the league, and he's going against the worst defense against tight ends. Tyreek Hill, one of the fastest men in the NFL. Sammy Watkins, a solid receiver. And while they don't have their starter, it didn't look like their starter was healthy. He might be questionable. They have Le'Veon Bell, who if given the ball enough times, most likely will do well. So it's not looking very good for Cleveland. They don't have an offense that can run the score up, generally speaking, and they don't have a defense that can stop not only the run but tight ends. So now there is some hope. The Cleveland fans need to hang their hat on the hope that 20 days away from live football will impact Mahomes, and it would have to impact him significantly. So hopefully he comes out rusty. Hopefully, for the Cleveland Browns anyway, hopefully he comes out rusty. Hopefully that creates opportunities for Cleveland to force turnovers, get a quick double-digit lead, similar to what they did against Pittsburgh, and somehow be able to hold on. If they're able to get that lead, perhaps they can control the ball, running, keeping the ball out of Mahomes and Kelce's hands. But that's a pretty big hope. Now, the other thing, too, is that we're talking about how many points Kansas City scored and all that stuff. The other thing is that Kansas City hasn't won by more than 10 points since week 8. And when they did win by more than 10 points in week 8, it was against the Jets. So that's not really saying much. I still think the Chiefs will win this game pretty convincingly. And I believe that the only way that they don't is if Mahomes is genuinely rusty. However, last year in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl, they trailed every game and they came back to win. So hoping for Mahomes rust might just actually play into the Chiefs' accidental game plan of losing up front and then recovering later. So we'll see. I think the Chiefs will win convincingly, but you never know. Cleveland could surprise everybody again. The odds on this game, they're giving Chiefs 10 points, and the over/under is 57. So even the odds makers kind of agree with me. All right, so that was the Super Wildcard weekend. Those are the game matchups this weekend. Saturday and Sunday games. Of course, if you have a DVR, if you have NFL Game Pass, you can wait. And I don't know how many people here have off on Monday. I don't recall what holiday is it. Is it Martin Luther King Day or? It's Martin Luther King Day. So I work at a bank, so we have off. I love Monday holidays, and this is maybe stuff you don't want to know about, but I love Monday holidays because I wait till Monday and then I watch as many games as I can Monday. And because of the NFL Game Pass, which you might think I'm plugging, but I'm not. They didn't pay me anything to say this. I wish they did. But the NFL Game Pass, you can just turn on a game, you can let it go. They cut out all the commercials. You just watch the game. So it's nice. Anyway. So that's the recap of the wild card weekend, a little preview of the divisional round this weekend. So let's move to, we are an Eagles podcast. A lot of stuff has happened over the last week with the Philadelphia Eagles. So we're going to recap a bunch of that. Now, of course, if you have a chance, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I am Bald Eagle 4133. I say that because I'm not always, and I'm not up to date because I do have a job. But you'll find the most important Eagles news on that site, and you'll get some information. You can also interact with me if you'd like. Also follow NSN Philly on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. NSN Philly is comprehensive Philadelphia sports, not specific just to the Eagles, but that's where you're going to find breaking news. You're going to find a bunch of information about all Philly teams and a bunch of podcasts like mine and others. So let's get to Eagles news. So a couple of things, a lot has happened over the last week. So there were rumors beforehand, but Jim Schwartz, our defensive coordinator, resigned. I'm a fan of this. Off most of the time I think and make decisions logically, but in some instances I don't, and this is one of them. I don't know that Jim Schwartz has any. He doesn't have any. You can't look at statistics and say he was a poor coach. Records don't. I mean, he went to the Super Bowl, and he didn't have a horrible record when he was the Lions head coach. I just don't like anybody that was associated with the Lions when they were doing so poorly. I also still remember, and I don't know if you guys do this, but when he was the head coach of the Lions, there was some sort of altercation with, I don't know, it was one of the Harbaughs, and he just was kind of a little ignorant. So not a fan of Jim Schwartz. So I'm glad he resigned. I'd also like to get some, and I guess I share the same sentiment with Lori. I'd like to get some new, fresh minds in there. Jim Schwartz has been around forever. Unfortunately, a failed head coach, and that's another thing. I'm not a big fan of failed head coaches being hired. So we'll go over some of the people that are looking to take some spots in Philly, and we'll talk about those. But I'm not a fan of failed head coaches. I just feel like I almost feel like if you're a head coach in the NFL and you fail, that you perhaps should hang it up completely. Maybe I'm being a little rough, but so I have no statistics to back that up. Just don't like Jim Schwartz. Never been a fan. So I'm excited about that. I'm glad I'm glad he resigned. That was nice because we didn't have to fire him. And I'm excited to find out who we're going to replace him with. Of course, Doug Peterson was fired. That was huge news. I don't think that anyone really saw that coming really that far in advance. There was some suspicion that it was either Wentz or Peterson was leaving. In that situation, I frankly would have chose Wentz to leave. But Peterson was fired. Now, from what I understand, and this is all, these are all from sources, right? But from what I understand, Peterson was focusing on winning in 2021. And he was promoting when he went into an interview with Lori, he focused on promoting people within. And the most offensive, and things changed when I heard about this, but the most offensive to me anyway, the most offensive recommendation that he made was promoting quarterbacks coach Press Taylor to offensive coordinator. And I say that's offensive and that bothers me because regardless of who you put the blame on, Carson Wentz had statistically the worst decline of any quarterback that has not retired in NFL history. So why on earth would you try and promote the quarterback coach that the guy who coached Carson Wentz this whole year and was not able to make not even an inch of improvement in Wentz's game? It's not like Wentz started off horribly, by the end of the season was doing mediocre, or he started off, slightly below mediocre and he ended up slightly, there was legitimately no improvement in Wentz's game throughout the season. And his coach was Press Taylor. How on earth would you promote that guy? How on earth would you? I feel like Peterson I don't know why he would do that. I don't know why the guy even wasn't fired immediately. Why he wasn't fired halfway through the season. Carson Wentz fell apart, legitimately fell apart. We heard nothing from Press Taylor. We heard nothing from fundamentals. We heard nothing about anything. I could sit there and pick out all the things Wentz did wrong, and I could help him do it right. And I'm not even a coach, and I never played quarterback. Obviously, it's fucking annoying. Like, why would you? I think Doug Peterson, number one, has a huge pair of balls, and number two, is a complete idiot, or he knows something drastic that I don't, or I don't know. I honestly don't have an excuse for him going in there and sticking up for Press Taylor. But frankly, if I was Jeff Lurie, I would have fired his ass immediately as well. The moment he said we should promote Press Taylor, I would immediately said, fire him. You're fired. I wouldn't even ask any more questions. I wouldn't care, because how are you going to? How can you say that Carson Wentz, that you feel strongly that Carson Wentz will revert back to his pre-2020 form if you have no idea why he regressed to begin with? And you not only do you have no idea, you still have no idea, as far as we can tell, because you couldn't. If you did have an idea, you couldn't fix it. You could not fix it even remotely. So anyway, part of the reason. So getting back after my little rant and hatred towards the quarterback coach, deservedly, I think. So part of the reason with Doug Peterson and Lori apparently was that Peterson was claimed to be focusing on winning recently, which I'm not sure how that bleeds into hiring a failed quarterbacks coach. But anyway, while Lori claims to be focused on the future and building a team to win long term. I mentioned Peterson, that Peterson brought up some internal promotions in reference to offensive coordinator and things like that. Laurie was apparently hoping that he would bring in some really big outside names of coordinators to fill vacancies. So a lot of they just, from almost every perspective, they just weren't on the same team. I did read something as well, and I don't think I didn't get a chance to post it or look at it, but I did also see that I think Peterson had planned on making Hurts the starter next year, and that was also a point of contention. Which, that in itself, I don't know, is a reason to really to quit or fire somebody. And then there was also some rumors that maybe it wasn't completely Peterson being fired, that maybe perhaps it was sort of mutual or maybe a little bit more mutual than a complete firing, because apparently Doug Peterson never really planned, from what I read, never really planned on being a long-term career NFL coach like an Andy Reid or a Bill Belichick or something. He had planned on coaching for somewhere in the area of 8 to 10 years. And so because he wasn't as invested and didn't have plans on being a long-term coach, he was he wanted things the way he wanted them. He wasn't so desperate to coach somebody that he was willing to flex and to be flexible. And he was frustrated at being told what to do, which I guess as a head coach, I guess you can find frustrating. So we have no head coach, no defensive coordinator. We didn't hire an offensive coordinator last year, which could be part of the problem. And they're doing some restructuring. And before Peterson was fired, there was talk about us going back to a more traditional structure with an offensive coordinator. But so some of the candidates that the Eagles are that have been floated out there that the Eagles might be interested in, some of which are obviously better than others. The one that I am the most interested about, and frankly, this is not based on logic either, more on emotion because I don't follow college, was Oklahoma Sooners head coach Lincoln Riley. I heard really good things about him. So that seemed like a good pick. They're looking at Tennessee's offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith. Tampa Bay's defensive coordinator, Todd Bowles. Do not want Todd Bowles. He was a failed head coach. And 49ers defensive coordinator, Robert Saleh. I don't know how likely that one is to happen. Actually, and we'll talk about more about defensive positions. But he has had 2 interviews with the Jets, a second interview today. So typically when they have a second interview, that generally speaking, that moves to something. Now there is some interest in some people from Kansas City, of course, their offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, and their quarterbacks coach / passing game coordinator, Mike Kafka. Of course, they can't meet with Tampa Bay's defensive coordinator, Todd Bowles, or the guys from Kansas City until they lose. Tampa Bay will most likely lose this weekend, but I have a feeling Kansas City might make it to the Super Bowl again. So a Kansas City Green Bay Super Bowl, on a side note, I think would be a great one to watch. I think KC Green Bay would be good, really, really entertaining. And I don't know who would win it, actually. With those 2 offenses, I'm not sure who has the advantage. So those are some of the top candidates that are in the mix. We did actually hold our first interview. I think it was today. We interviewed Panthers offensive coordinator Joe Brady. Again, not necessarily a huge fan. I guess Joe Brady has been interviewing with everybody. Any team that has a vacancy, head coaching vacancy, he's interviewed with. So I don't know that means much. We have an interview scheduled with Patriots inside linebacker coach Gerard Mayo, also a former Patriots linebacker. We have the one scheduled apparently this week, so I guess that means tomorrow or Friday. No real rumors about the likelihood of any of these guys being hired. And then lastly, a really good internal candidate, or at least the one that's the leading internal candidate, is Deuce Staley. So Deuce Staley, if you're not aware, was what we drafted him in. I don't recall what year we drafted him. But we drafted him in I think 71st overall or something like that in one of the drafts. Good career with the Eagles, had a couple of 3,000 yard rushing years. Went to the Steelers, was their primary back I think for 1 year, and then ended up retiring. In 2010, he came on as an intern. He in 2011 was hired on as a special teams quality control coach. He was later promoted, I think, in 13 to running backs coach. And then in 18, he was promoted to assistant head coach. So he not only does he bring a lot of experience in different positions, he brings playing experience, which I think is very valuable. But he's also survived 3 of our last coaches. He was here under Reed as the special teams QC coach. He was under Kelly, Chip Kelly, while he was here under that wonderful experiment, and then he, of course, was here under Peterson. So, so he's probably, well, he is the leading internal candidate. Frankly, I haven't heard of anybody else internally that could be promoted, but that's one of them. Now, when it comes to the type of coach that Jeffrey Lurie typically hires, it's generally offensive-minded people. And if you look at, and so it brings to question some of these, 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Salah. Maybe they're just trying to reach out and interview as many people as are available just to see what's out there. The Patriots inside linebacker coach, that'd be a pretty big jump from inside linebacker coach to head coach as well. But I'm not sure how what the chances are of a defensive-minded coach being hired. Now, I did read, I believe, a quote from Jeffrey Lurie, who said that he has no preference either way. But historically speaking, he has. Jeffrey Lurie, as the owner, has hired 4 coaches. The first one was his only defensive coach, and that was Ray Rhodes. That was back in 1995. Since then, he's hired Andy Reid, who was offensive, Chip Kelly, big offensive guy, and then, of course, Doug Peterson, who was an offensive guy too. So he tilts towards the offensive-minded guy. So it's going to be interesting to see who ends up surviving to the end. In my opinion, I think I would be excited about either the Oklahoma Sooners head coach, because he's never coached in the NFL, and I'm excited about a new, fresh mind. I'd also be excited about the quarterback coach, passing game coordinator Mike Kafka, because if anybody, I mean, perhaps Mahomes is mostly talent, maybe, but you still have to rein in talent. I still feel like there's some value to what the Mike Kafka has brought to Mahomes. So either Kafka or the Sooners head coach, Oklahoma Sooners head coach Lincoln Riley, I think would make good head coaches. And if anybody can turn around Wentz, if anybody's figured out what his problem is, I think it would possibly be Mike Kafka. So my, one of those 2 guys as the head coach, and then I would be ecstatic if Deuce Staley was the offensive coordinator. I think that's a nice move for him. I think he would probably move better into an offensive an OC position, offensive coordinator position. So I'd be excited to see that, because I would like Deuce Staley to do well. He has done well. Now some people complained when I posted this on Instagram that he hasn't done a good job of the running back rotation, and you could argue that Miles Sanders should have gotten more carries. I would argue that we should have run the ball in general more often. Whether or not we should have given it to Miles Sanders more often, he did have one of the best top 5 yards per carry in the league. But at the same time, he did have some injuries. And so I can understand perhaps limiting his snaps to a degree anyway, to save him for when you really need him. You got to also remember too, while perhaps Deuce Staley was in charge of the rotation, Deuce Staley was not most likely in charge of the play calling. And so while he does decide which running back goes in, he doesn't decide how often they get the ball necessarily. So I still think he'd be good. So I'd like that. I guess I'm not sure if I'm leaning more towards, KC's Mike Kafka or the Oklahoma Sooners head coach, Lincoln Riley. I don't know a lot about either of them, but they sound like they'd be great fits. So we'll see. We should hear some about some interviews this week, and as teams like Tampa Bay and eventually Kansas City lose or win the Super Bowl and the postseason goes on, those coordinators will be available. And I guess it's going to be interesting. I don't think I did read, I believe that I don't believe that Lincoln Riley is committed to anything either way. And I'm not sure if Kafka is looking. I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't, but I'm not sure if he's looking for a spot. I don't know why you turn down a head coaching job, but so it might be a while until we have a head coach. It probably will be a while until we have a head coach. It'd probably be smart if we waited and took our time instead of just jumping on somebody. So the next week's going to be interesting, to say the least. All right. So this is the end of the Bald Eagle podcast. I appreciate everybody that's listened. Again, do me a favor, follow me on Bald Eagle 4133. That's on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Oh, and I have a YouTube channel. I'm not streaming yet live, but I will upload the recorded version. I'm having trouble linking everything. So, but if you go to YouTube, you have to search the Bald Eagle podcast. That's the only way you'll find me. You have to be very specific. So go check me out on all that social media, and go look at NSN's Notoriety Sports Network, and NSN Philly on all social media, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter as well. All right. Thanks for watching, and go Eagles.